Alright, welcome everyone to a new episode of the Full Body Science Applied series. In this video, we're going to be hitting the fourth full body workout of the week, and it's going to be a leg focused session. So even though we're hitting the full body, we're going to be doing a bit more volume for the legs. And like I've been saying before, all these videos, if this setup doesn't make any sense to you, I'd recommend checking out my Science Explained video on high frequency full body training first. All right, so we're kicking things off with 3 sets of 5 reps on the reset deadlift with 75% of our 1 rep max. Now the reset deadlift can mean different things to different coaches. Some folks use it to mean you fully reset each rep, meaning you take your hands off the bar, stand up, brace, and lift again on each and every rep. And I think this approach is great for people who struggle with getting into position on that first rep or struggle with their deadlift setup in general, which I've covered in depth in a Technique Tuesday video, which I'll link down below. So if you find the first rep more challenging than the second or third reps, doing a full reset like this could be helpful. Now, on the other hand, I personally tend to use the reset deadlift simply to mean that the bar comes to a full and complete stop in between each and every rep. It's very common to see recreational gym goers and bodybuilders do touch and go or bounce and go reps, which certainly can have their place, but from a strength perspective, I do see them as a way of cheating, since you're using the momentum of the plates bouncing off the ground to help carry the weight up. So the far majority of the time, the plates should be coming to a full and complete reset on the floor in between each and every rep. Now I should say, even though deadlifts sometimes get a bad rap as an inferior hypertrophy exercise, I personally think they're one of the best exercises out there for beefing up the entire posterior chain from the traps all the way down to the hamstrings, and for testing full body brute strength. So in my opinion, it'd be almost disrespectful to write a full body program without having a deadlift in it, assuming you can do it safely. So when it comes to conventional versus sumo, the differences are actually very small, but on a full body setup, I tend to favor sumo just because research shows that it is slightly more quad dominant and slightly less lower back dominant, meaning we can get a bigger quad stimulus without creating too much of a lower back recovery demand, which is something I've been particularly cautious about throughout this series. With that said, the hypertrophic differences between sumo and conventional are pretty small, so I think the best advice is to simply pick a stance that you're stronger with. Now, according to an in-house analysis of the 2018 and 2019 World Powerlifting Championships from the Strength Athlete Coaching Team, you can see that which stance a lifter is stronger with is tightly correlated with their body size, where lighter lifters tend to favor the sumo stance and heavier lifters tend to favor the conventional stance. At least this trend is apparent in men. In women, it isn't quite as clear. Now, I contacted the head coach Bryce Lewis about this, and he said it's probably because weight classes are just height classes in disguise. It seems to be the case that shorter lifters get more out of pulling sumo, perhaps because of their shorter femur lengths and more vertical back positioning. Either way, I'd say the best way to figure out what stance to use is to just be your own scientist, play around with both, and see which one you're personally better at. Periodically switching back and forth could have merit as well for developing weak points, so occasionally switching it up isn't a bad idea either. Now, one thing I want to focus on here is the use of the lats in the deadlift, which is something a lot of people seem to struggle with. And many people seem to be under the impression that the lats play a big role in keeping the upper back from rounding in the deadlift, but as pointed out in this article from Greg Nuckols, the lats don't even attach to the upper thoracic vertebrae at all, so they can't be responsible for keeping the upper back extended. What they instead do is keep the bar in closer, which then indirectly makes the lift easier on your glutes, hamstrings, and upper back because it creates less distance between the load and the joint, meaning less external torque that your muscles need to overcome. Now, this isn't something to overthink, but it certainly can make a significant difference, especially if you've never thought about it before. So I personally like to cue for lat engagement by thinking about pulling the bar in toward my shins, almost as if doing a pullover against the bar. And if you can't figure out what this should feel like, I'll link this cueing video from Dean Somerset below, which illustrates exactly what the lats should be doing in the deadlift. Now, in terms of progression here, we're alternating between odd weeks and even weeks, where we'll switch between doing sets of 5 and sets of 2 with a simple linear load increase from week to week for each rep scheme. So the sets of 5 are going to be great for accumulating volume and mastering technique, while the heavy 2s are going to develop maximum strength, mostly through neural adaptation. All right, after that, we're moving on to 3 sets of 8 reps on the weighted dip. Now, dips are one of those exercises that can get a bad rap for being rough on the shoulders, but in my opinion are one of the single best chest builders out there. Now, when it comes to shoulder health, the main things I like to focus on are making sure you're keeping your upper back straight by keeping your shoulder blades retracted and depressed, just like you would on a bench press, and you want to limit your range of motion to what feels comfortable for you. For most people, going to about a 90-degree elbow bend is going to be plenty to get the chest, delts, and triceps all heavily involved without overcommitting the joints. Now, when it comes to building the chest, many people think of the dip as a strictly lower chest exercise, but in 2010, Brett Contreras ran a solo EMG experiment, which found that the dip actually saw higher peak activation for the upper chest than even the incline press with 225 pounds. So even though the lower chest was most active when compared to the mid and upper chest on the dip itself, that doesn't imply that the dip is only a lower chest exercise. It actually hits all the fibers of the entire pec extremely effectively. And I think you can accentuate this even more by leaning slightly forward by about 30 degrees or so and really driving your hands down into the handles as if doing a press while maintaining consistent posture throughout the range of motion. Okay, after that, we're moving on to 3 sets of 20 on the leg extension. And you guys should remember from day 1 that I like to space out my leg exercises on these full body days with at least one upper body exercise, just so they feel a bit more recovered from the deadlifts or squats that we hit before. So what I've been trying on these lately is a new cue where before I initiate that first rep, I think about keeping my glutes, hamstrings, and calves as loose as possible while thinking about flexing my quads as hard as I can before initiating the rep. So I'll think about squeezing my quads to move the weight rather than just kicking the weight out in front of me. And then even on the negative, I'm thinking about flexing my quads as the weight lowers under control. That's a subtle difference, but I do find I can get much more out of the exercise this way than if I just think about, okay, we got 3 sets of 20, let's just bang them out. And you'll likely find that when you actively squeeze and flex your quads on each and every rep, you might feel so much of a quad burn that you need to stop a bit shorter of where you'd normally stop with the same weight, which I think is fine. With exercises like these, we want to focus on creating as strong of a mind-muscle connection as possible to help produce a large tensile stimulus without the same need to load as heavily. And we know from research that combining various exercises is better for overall quad development than simply just doing squats on their own. And I think one of the advantages of high-frequency full-body training is being able to give these isolation exercises like leg extensions more attention and focus, since they aren't coming at the end of a really brutal leg day. All right, after that, we're moving on to 3 sets of 12 on each side with the unilateral lat pull down. Now, one thing I see with most full body programs is that they tend to focus very heavily on compound exercises, and as a result, become quite minimalistic in their approach. Now, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, especially if you're trying to minimize your time investment in the gym, but these minimalistic setups might not offer enough loading variety, and as a result, might overtax the same joints in the same way, especially on a high frequency setup. So I like to include some unilateral work to prevent doing the same exact loading patterns that you tend to see over and over with the same basic barbell compound movements. And this is also another great way to develop a mind-muscle connection with your non-dominant side, since most people tend to favor one side over the other on bilateral exercises, which can lead to asymmetrical development over time. So when it comes to the pull down, I'm doing these as a combination of shoulder extension and adduction by thinking about pulling my elbows both down and in. So I'm not just driving my elbows down like in a pullover, and I'm not just pulling my elbows in like in a wide grip row. I'm doing both at the same time to cover both primary functions of the lat in a single move. All right, now after that, we're gonna finish off the rest of the workout with a giant superset with the rope face pull, Egyptian lateral raise, and cable overhead tricep extension for 3 sets of 15 reps each. So up first, the rope face pull. Now there are 2 ways that you can set this up. One way is more mid-trap dominant and the other more rear delt and rotator cuff dominant. With the trap dominant option, you wanna think about just doing it exactly like a high row. So driving your elbows straight back and squeezing your shoulder blades together. Now with the rear delt dominant option, you wanna think about externally rotating at the shoulder. And I like to think of it like doing a rear double biceps pose while pulling the rope up to your forehead. So because there's already a lot of rowing in this routine, I'm doing the rear delt focused version here to help strengthen up the external rotators and give the rear delts a little more love. So after that, drop the cable down a few pegs, leave the rope on, and do 15 overhead tricep extensions. Now you can do these unilaterally by just grabbing the end of the cable itself, but if you wanna cut down on time a bit, since it is a giant set after all, you can easily just knock out both arms at once with the rope. And here, because the cable provides a more consistent tension curve than a dumbbell or a barbell would, I do allow my triceps to go a little further back to get a little extra stretch at the bottom, and then focus on squeezing my triceps to move the weight all the way up to full elbow extension. And to finish off the giant set, we're gonna drop the cables all the way down, put a D handle on, and run the cable between our legs for Egyptian lateral raises. And while on a dumbbell lateral raise, I'll normally cut the range of motion a bit short at the bottom, where there won't be any active tension on the delts. When doing these with cables, I'll allow the cable to go down in between my legs to get a solid stretch on my delts, since the cable will be pulling against the delt at all time points throughout the range of motion. And that's gonna be a wrap for this workout, guys. So I've got one more delt-focused full body workout to go to complete the full series, and then at the end, I'll do a full tally of all the volumes for each body part, so you guys can stay tuned for that. Also, I'll put a button over here to my high-frequency full body program. It runs for 10 weeks, and if you guys would like to have all this stuff organized into an actionable routine with all the relevant periodization and progression included, you can check that out. Don't forget to leave me a thumbs up if you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys all here in the next one.